Okay, this is going to be a demonstration of using Quickdraw version 5.0 in order to do grid design for a Drawloom. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is create a 4-thread satin for starting point. And let me create a second one here just so I can tell the difference. So now, what I'm going to do on the second one here, I want to toggle it and reverse it. Now, what I'm going to do is use this pattern for the background, this pattern for the pattern. And when I hit the thread sub, the first thing it's going to do is compare those two. And it's going to determine the tie-up, it's going to determine the countermarche, which threads are high and which threads are low. So what it's actually going to do is compare, for example, where that thread's high, this thread's high, then that thread needs to be high. Where it's different on the two for the rest of the points here, where it's low on one and high on the other, it's going to assume that's off the draw threads, and then it's going to see the low here, the low there, and say, okay, here's all the lower threads. So let me just set up the simplest little pattern here. And if I tell it I've got a Drawloom and do thread sub, that's the pattern it's now created. Let me go back in. And so I can now see in the tie-up, these were the rising sheds and the O's, the X's are the falling sheds. So it's automatically going to generate the ground treadling and threading for me. So now, once I've got that defined, now I can start having some more fun. And say, for example, let me turn the symmetry lines on. I'll set symmetry in the middle of a point. I'll ask for a freehand tool. And I can now just kind of randomly create whatever's interesting. I find for these, I typically want to keep it flat into the corners so that when I do the pattern, it picks up something a little bit more. So now I've selected that area. When I do a thread substitution, if I zoom way out, I can actually see it's now done that particular threading substitution, which is the two 4-thread satins. And it's generated that pattern. And I can then go back in and just kind of randomly create whatever fun stuff I want. And I've noticed my pattern, my block definition was still up here in the corner. I'm just going to leave it there. Whoops, wasn't really wanted, but if I do that with the right mouse click, and let me bring something into the middle, is what happens when I grab that whole thing and convert it. It's actually going to pull those corners, and so what I'm looking for is how those will interact on the thread in the middles. So I've now created what I can do here. Okay, let me walk through another sample of using the grid view in order to do Drawloom design. Now, when I was first starting working on the Drawloom tools in Quickdraw, I was working with a Drawloom weaver named Virginia Parks. And just about the time I got done, Virginia sent me a copy of what project she had just finished working on. So this was actually done using graph paper and a pencil, obviously. So she sent me the scan of that page. So what I'd actually done is then gone back through that just to enter it to make sure my tools were working. So I started from that graph paper image and just had used basically a straight edge of another frame and just slid it up. And started with, for example, the bottom row is 19 threads. So I just asked for the line tool and just started an arbitrary point. So there's the 19 points on the bottom row. The next one was the 3 X's. The next one was 5 X's. It was a little bit easier to count with the quartile grid compared to the plain graph paper she was using. And after about a half an hour of just going through tick by tick by tick, I had actually produced the right half of the image here. And after I had verified that whole process, actually let me clear the left-hand side of the screen just to show you what had happened there. Hit the delete key. If I start in the bottom right-hand corner and grab it a little bit over, if I hit that copy to the grid, I can then paste the image, and I'm going to start over in the same center line. So I've now got the symmetric copy. So I've now got the other side of her original draft image. And obviously I was saving this thing frequently as I was going along just to make sure I didn't lose my time. Now the other thing I'd also done is gone up into the corner. She said she did it in 8-thread satin. So I just created, actually what I did was use the block substitution to create an 8-thread satin and just copied that and reversed the image. Similar I did it in the simple version. So once I've got the 8-thread satin, do another copy off the other side. Use that for the pattern. Then when I zoom out, and I'm using the mouse to scroll out, now what I can do is just kind of doing a mouse click around the edges of it. So I'm adding 3 or 4 threads on each side. Now when I'm set to a Drawloom, I want to do a thread substitution. In one click, it's now actually done that entire pattern. So from that image, from this block diagram, like I said, it took me about a half an hour to flesh that out, enter the threading diagram, and I've now actually got the pattern that I could actually go weave. Just for frame of reference, the image here is actually what her version of the woven piece looked like. And this one was still in black and white, so the next thing I'd actually done, I've got the image sitting in paint, which was down here. If I do a select all and copy, the next thing I actually did was go into Quickdraw and went to the color palette, pasted the image of that. In order to match the colors, what I actually did was then select a little block of that. So I've now got the gray color. I use that to replace the black, and use the tan to replace the white. Now when I come back in, there was the image. I can figure out what size to do it as compared to the original, the actual woven piece. So that gives me a pretty good idea of what it's going to look like. The threads blended a little bit more here. The aspect ratio is a little bit different because my boxes are perfectly square versus the beat's going to affect that slightly. Looks like hers are slightly vertical. But that allows me to go through, create that pattern. This will be another example of using Quickdraw and a different technique for creating a Drawloom pattern. In this particular case, what I wanted to do is go to the internet and find an image. I was looking for a fairly generic, non-political face that people would recognize. For some reason, Mother Teresa came to mind as a recognizable face. And you go to if you open a standard browser, if you do a right click, I can then copy the image. Let me just pick up that random one there. If I paste that image, it's going to automatically size it as well as convert it to black and white. Now that image didn't, because of the contrast on it and so forth, did not pick up real well. I had another image I played with before. It's a little bit of luck in terms of which images really work well. And I've just opened it with Paint, Control-C to copy it. When I now go back into Quickdraw, I've now got a much cleaner image here I can play with. Okay, I've got two choices here now. I've got the image sitting on the grid. First option I have is I can just grab that image, and I'm not set to Drawloom, I'm just set to Profile. If I export that draft, it's now just going to save that as a profile draft. And when I go to the Loom Help with that large pattern, that's the weft it's going to give me. And you'll notice the bottom lines were blank. As I step up, it's going to show me in the bottom row, here's all the draw pulls that should be pulled for that pattern. So as I walk through that, it's actually going to show me those draw pulls from the profile draft. Now I could also have gone through, go to the image, I can also do that as a thread draft. So let me scroll up into a corner someplace. Quick little tieup pattern as a reference. So I'm going to tell it I want to do that. You can fill in satin or damask or whatever you want to do here. And that one I need to toggle it, so I'm actually going to do the pattern in that one. So now when I scroll out, again, I'm going to kind of crop the image a little bit when I select the frame. This time I'm going to tell it I'm doing Drawloom and a thread substitution. It's now going to take that entire image. There's a large image that's a little slow to display. And it's going to give me the thread representation of that. Now when I go to Loom Help and I ask for a weft, it's going to show me for each shot what draw cords need to be pulled. And it's going to tell me as it cycles through, these are now pulled, this one's released. So I can walk through that pattern quickly. So I've got that option of just doing that. The other little bit of magic, I go back in and view, and if I zoom in, it's a very large pattern. I can see that it's actually filled in the countermarche tie-ups. I can see the highs and lows for that threading that's there. So that was the image I just played with. Was a fairly small image. I have a larger copy of it that's in this window. Let me come back to the grid and do a new bitmap. I've actually got a little bit larger copy. It looks about the same, so I haven't lost much in that sense. I still have the two profile drafts. I can see the threading sequence across the top, which is a lot of threads, which is 200 vertical blocks, 208 horizontal blocks as a full image. If I come in and select that guy now, when I do that block substitution with 4-thread damage, that's still going to be a very large image. So when I actually ask for the thread substitution, it's going to take a while because it is a big image. And as I zoom out, it takes a long time to draw it. So that's actually zoomed out as far as I can now. And I can't even see the whole image on the screen here. So I do have a couple of other options. If I go into the warp editor, unfortunately it's slow because it's drawing a lot of information. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So if I ask for the warp threads to be at 50%, again, it's slow to draw it. I'll think about that later. And I go to the weft. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's actually what it is now doing is taking 4 threads for each pixel on the screen. You'll notice it's a little bit grayer because it's actually averaging those 4 pixels together. On the other hand, I can now get twice as much information on the screen, and I can actually shrink that further, but it does get pretty slow. Some of the test runs I was doing are like 30 seconds per. But you can see the entire image, and you can zoom in. So I've now got, she's maybe 1/6 of that screen. As I hit the zoom in, and go to the other view, it's a little bit easier to see more. You'll notice this is not quick because it's doing full Drawloom calculations on each point across that. But I can zoom all the way from a full image on the screen to see an individual threads, and the bigger the threads are, the less it has to draw and the quicker it gets. So I can actually see little itty bits and pieces, but I can see every pixel on the original image. Every one of those spots has now translated to a point on the screen. And so that gives me the ability of looking at a broad range of images and whatever's creative. Thank you.